So he's saying if you come to church every Sunday and you hear the word but you don't do it, it's just like you forget it as soon as you walk out the door. He says there's a gap between what you hear and what you do. And it shouldn't be a gap between what you hear and what you do. He opens chapter 2 and begins talking about the challenges that the church has with playing favorites. Meaning now that you can't treat people differently based on material differences. The story he begins to tell is that there's a man who has a gold ring on in goodly apparel. And when it talks about that, it talked about it wasn't just a single gold ring. We read that thinking it's a single gold ring, but a lot of men wore gold rings. But when he refers to that, it refers to somebody who wears tons of rings on every finger and goodly apparel. He says if you see that man coming in, people see that man and escort him to the best seat in the house. He says you can't play favorites, and you see another man who comes in with his clothes all messed up and tore up and dirty. He says you take that man, he says, and you make that man your footstool. He says you can't do that. He says because some of the ones that look like they're dressed up in good apparel, he says they look good on the outside, but they ain't got nothing on the inside. He said, God is no respecter of persons, and neither should we be. He then begins to talk about the law and that we are transgressors of the law and the difficulty with keeping all of the law, and people try to hold people to the letter of the law. But he says you have to realize that if you break one law, you broke them all. The same God who said do not murder is the same God that said do not commit adultery. So he says if you commit adultery, it's the same as if you committed and broke all the laws. He says now mercy, he said, is a better thing than judgment. Meaning now you shouldn't have harsh judgment. He says because if you want to obtain mercy, you got to learn how to show some mercy. And knowing that God showed you mercy, you ought to be willing to show people mercy as opposed to giving them harsh judgment. And that leads us to where we are in our text for today. When we get to verse 14, when he says, what doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works, can faith save him? As James poses this question to the readers, we should all ask that very same question of ourselves. When it comes to our Christian journey and our Christian walk, is it just talk or is it really a walk? Heard a preacher just say yesterday that people wear the t-shirt that say they're saved and wear the hat that say they're saved, but they ain't never met God. The way I say it is you wear them on the outside, but you got nothing on the inside. James didn't want us to just talk about Christianity. He wanted us to be about it. When I read